What if a single sentence could shatter a billionaire's empire? We're not talking about a stock market crash or a corporate scandal whispered in boardrooms. We're talking about a sentence spoken by a 24-year-old waitress in the middle of a packed 5-star restaurant. Everett Winslow, a man whose name is carved into the New York City skyline, thought he could humiliate anyone without consequence. He picked the wrong person. He was about to learn that the past he buried didn't just have ghosts. It had a voice. And when that voice spoke, it was loud enough to bring his entire world to a dead, silent halt. Stay with us as we uncover the story of how one woman's courage exposed a lie, kept for over 2 decades. The restaurant Aurelia was not merely a place to eat, it was a statement. Perched on the 60th floor of a midtown Manhattan skyscraper, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the city's glittering nervous system. The air inside was a carefully curated blend of expensive perfume, simmering truffle oil, and the low, confident hum of the city's elite. Conversations were currency, and a table at Aurelia meant you had enough to spend. Tonight, the restaurant's gravitational center was a corner booth occupied by Everett Winslow. At 62, Everett was less a man and more a monument to ravenous ambition. His face, weathered by boardroom battles and insufficient sleep, was still handsome in a severe leonine way. His hair was the color of polished silver, swept back with a product that probably cost more than a weekly grocery bill for the average family. He was the founder and CEO of Winslow Industries, a real estate behemoth that had devoured competitors and reshaped skylines with brutal efficiency. His name was on buildings on charity wings and in the nightmares of his rivals. Across from him sat his son Wyatt, a younger, softer echo of the man before him. At 28, Wyatt had his father's height, but his mother's gentler features. He wore his bespoke suit with an unease that Everett had never possessed, as if he were still playing dress-up in his father's closet. The Henderson deal is about leverage, Wyatt, pure and simple. Everett was saying, his voice a low rumble that cut through the restaurant's polite din. He gestured with a fork, a silver scepter in his hand. They think they have a position of strength. We need to remind them that their strength is a privilege. We grant them not a right they possess. Father, their quarterly reports are solid. Wyatt countered, his tone respectful but firm. Going hostile might not be the best look. The press is already... The press, Everett scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. The press is a gnat. You swat it. You don't build your strategy around its buzzing. He took a sip of his $400, bottle of Chateau Margaux, his eyes scanning the room with an air of bored ownership. He hadn't just paid for a meal. He'd rented the entire establishment's deference for the evening. It was in this moment of regal dismissal that Daphne Miller approached the table. To the patrons of Aurelia, she was part of the scenery, as functional and forgettable as the crystal water glasses or the linen napkins. 24 years old, with tired but intelligent eyes and light brown hair, pulled back in a severe regulation bun. She moved with a practiced economy that spoke of years in the service industry. Her uniform, a crisp black blouse and trousers, was immaculate but anonymous. She was by design invisible, and that was precisely her plan. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, a rhythm of terror and resolve. For 6 months she had worked here, enduring condescending patrons and aching feet, all for this. She'd studied the reservation lists, waiting for his name to appear. Tonight it had. "Is everything to your satisfaction, sir?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. Everett didn't even look at her. He was still focused on Wyatt. "The problem with your generation, Wyatt, is that you confuse politeness with power. They are not the same." He finally flicked his gaze towards Daphne, not as a person, but as an interruption. "The wine is adequate. The steak, however..." He prodded the filet mignon on his plate. "This is medium rare. I requested rare. A deep, cool red center. This is pink. Is the concept of temperature that difficult to grasp in the kitchen? Daphne's breath hitched, but she kept her composure. My sincerest apologies, Mr. Winslow. I will have the chef prepare another for you immediately. Don't bother, he snapped, pushing the plate an inch away from himself. The moment is ruined. The entire pacing of the meal is thrown off. He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and his expression was one of profound irritation, the kind one might reserve for a stain on a favorite tie. What is your name? Daphne, sir. Daphne, he repeated, tasting the name with disdain. Well, Daphne, incompetence has consequences. In my world, mistakes like this cost millions. In your world, it seems it just ruins my dinner. I expect this to be reflected on the bill. Wyatt shifted uncomfortably. Father, it's just a steak. The young lady has apologized. Quiet, Wyatt, Everett commanded, without taking his eyes off Daphne. This is a lesson in standards. People must understand that mediocrity will not be tolerated. The humiliation was a physical force pressing down on her. The surrounding tables had quieted their occupants, sensing the friction, the raw display of power. It was the primal thrill of the arena, the lion toying with its prey. They were watching their faces, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Daphne felt a surge of adrenaline burn away her fear. This was it. The moment she had rehearsed in her small walk-up apartment 1,000 times. The moment she had dreaded and craved in equal measure. Her carefully constructed composure was a shell, and it was about to crack. She took a small, almost imperceptible step back from the table. Her hands clasped behind her back to hide their shaking. She looked at Everett Winslow, not as a server, not as an inferior, but as an equal, as an accuser. You're right, she said, her voice suddenly clear and resonant, carrying further than she intended. Incompetence does have consequences. Everett raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the sudden shift in her tone. A flicker of a spine. How interesting. Fired, by the way. You can collect your things. He turned back to his son, considering the matter closed. But Daphne didn't move. And so does cruelty. She continued, her voice gaining strength and abandonment. Now Everett turned back fully, his face darkening. The amusement was gone, replaced by a cold fury. I suggest you walk away now before I have you removed. You have no idea who you're talking to. Oh, I do, Daphne said, and the words felt as though they were being torn from the deepest part of her soul. I know exactly who you are, Everett. The use of his first name was a shocking breach of protocol. The restaurant manager, a perpetually nervous man named Mr. Dubois, began to hurry over from across the room. Wyatt looked mortified, his face flushed. Everett Winslow slowly placed his fork and knife on the table, the silver clinking with unnerving finality. He leaned forward, his voice a menacing whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. You have made a catastrophic mistake. He began to raise his voice, the dam of his civility breaking. Do you think you can come in here in this place and speak to me with such disrespect? You are nothing, a speck, a nobody who will be forgotten by the time I sign the credit card slip. His voice rose with each word, a crescendo of pure, unchecked arrogance. The entire restaurant was now frozen, a tableau of horrified faces and suspended wine glasses. I could buy this building and have it torn down with you still inside. I will ruin you. I will ensure you never work in this city again. I will— He was mid-rant, his face contorted in a mask of rage when Daphne delivered the line she had carried like a stone in her heart for 24 years. She held his furious gaze, and with a voice that was eerily calm amidst the storm he had created, she spoke one single sentence. You scream just like you did the night you left my mother to die." Silence. It wasn't a gradual quiet. It was a sudden, violent void of sound, as if a switch had been thrown on the universe. The clinking of cutlery, the murmur of conversation, the distant city traffic. It all vanished. Mr. Dubois, who had been rushing forward, stopped dead in his tracks. Wyatt's jaw literally dropped. Every single patron, from the hedge fund managers to the society dames, was staring mouths agape. But their reactions were irrelevant. The only reaction that mattered was the one at the corner table. Everett Winslow froze. The rage on his face didn't just fade. It shattered, replaced by a ghastly grey pallor. His mouth remained slightly open, the last venomous word he was about to spit out dying on his lips. His eyes, those famously predatory eyes, were wide with a kind of primal shock Daphne had only ever seen in animals caught in headlights. He looked at her truly, looked at her, and for the first time, it wasn't with contempt or annoyance. It was with a dawning, sickening horror of recognition. The name he had buried, the face he had erased, the night he had tried to forget. It was all there, reflected in the eyes of the waitress he had just tried to destroy. The entire restaurant, a room full of the most powerful people in New York City, remained utterly, completely, and devastatingly silent. The monument had cracked. The silence in Aurelia stretched for an eternity that lasted perhaps 10 seconds. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, woven from shock and disbelief. In that silence, Daphne felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a scene from a movie. The faces around her were a blur of gaping mouths and wide eyes. Mr. Dubois stood like a statue, his hands half raised in a gesture of aborted intervention. Wyatt looked from his father to Daphne, and back again, his expression one of utter bewilderment. Then Everett moved. It was a small, jerky motion, like a puppet whose strings had just been cut. He blinked once, twice. The ghastly grey of his skin began to be replaced by a blotchy, angry red. "That's—" He started his voice, a hoarse croak, nothing like his earlier booming rage. "That's a lie. That's slander." He pushed himself up from the booth, his movements clumsy. "This is an extortion attempt. It's a pathetic, disgusting shakedown." He looked around the room, trying to reassert his dominance, but his eyes were wild. He was no longer the lion. He was the one who had been wounded. The other patrons weren't looking at him with fear anymore, but with a new, ravenous curiosity. This was better than gossip. This was a public execution of a reputation. Daphne didn't flinch. She had anticipated this. The denial. The attack. From a pocket in her apron, she pulled a small, tarnished silver locket, its chain coiled in her palm. It was old and cheap, the kind of thing you might win at a county fair. She wore this every day, Daphne said, her voice still unnervingly steady. Her name was Isla Penrose. You called her Izzy. The name hit Everett like a physical blow. He visibly recoiled. Izzy. A name he hadn't heard or allowed himself to think in over 2 decades. It was a name from another life, a life of cheap apartments, instant noodles, and a love so fierce it had felt like it could power the entire city. A life he had systematically dismantled and buried. Wyatt stood up now, his face a mask of confusion. "Father, what is she talking about? Who is Isla?" "She's nobody," Everett roared, finally finding his voice again, though it was strained and brittle. "She's a lunatic security. Get her out of here." But Daphne held the locket up. "You gave it to her on her 19th birthday. You were broke. You told her one day you'd replace it with diamonds. She told you she'd rather have the silver because it was from you." Every detail was a hammer blow against the fortress Everett had built around his past. He stared at the locket, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He remembered. He remembered the feel of the cheap metal in his hand, the hopeful, dazzling smile on Izzy's face under the dim light of their tiny walk-up in Hell's Kitchen, Mr. Cole. Dubois finally found his feet and scurried over his face, pale. "Miss, please, you need to come with me." Daphne ignored him. Her focus was entirely on Everett. "You don't have to believe me," she said, her voice softening slightly, which was somehow more damning than her anger. "But you know it's true. I have her eyes." And he did. As the shock receded, the recognition crystallized. The shape of her face, the stubborn set of her jaw, and most of all her eyes. They were Isla's eyes, eyes that had once looked at him with adoration, and now looked at him with the cold, clear light of judgment. Everett Winslow. The man who never backed down did the unthinkable. He turned and fled. He practically shoved his son out of the way, storming towards the exit without another word, without his coat, without a backward glance. The titan of industry didn't walk. He ran like a common thief. Wyatt, white-faced and trembling, hesitated for a second, his gaze locked on Daphne. He looked utterly lost, a boy whose entire world had just been upended. Then he turned and hurried after his father, leaving behind a half-eaten meal, a $400 bottle of wine, and the deafening buzz of scandal that had just erupted in their wake. The moment the Winslows were gone, the restaurant exploded into a cacophony of whispers. Daphne finally let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for her entire life. Her legs felt weak, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "You're fired, of course," Mr. Dubois hissed, his professional terror now turning to managerial fury. "Get out. I'll have security escort you." "That won't be necessary," Daphne said, her strength returning. She slowly took off her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table next to Everett Winslow's untouched plate. She met Mr. Dubois' gaze. "I quit." She walked out of Aurelia, not through the staff entrance in the back, but through the main doors, right past the stunned hostess. She didn't run. She walked with a dignity she had never been afforded in that room before. The cold night air of New York City hit her face, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like freedom. An hour later, she was sitting in a dingy 24-hour diner downtown, a world away from the opulence of Aurelia. The coffee was bitter, the lighting was fluorescent, and the seat of the booth was cracked vinyl. Across from her sat Liam O'Connell, a freelance journalist with an insatiable appetite for truth and a perpetually rumpled coat. "You actually did it," Liam said, shaking his head in disbelief, a grin spreading across his face. "I've got 3 different sources calling me already. Billionaire flees 5-star restaurant after confrontation with Waitress. It's going to be everywhere by morning." Daphne wrapped her cold hands around the warm mug. "It had to be public, Liam. You know why. If I'd approached him privately, he would have crushed me. He would have paid me off or threatened me, and I would have disappeared. It had to be somewhere he couldn't control the narrative. Somewhere with witnesses." "And you gave them a hell of a show," Liam said, pulling out a notepad. "So he ran. He actually ran." "Like his life depended on it," Daphne confirmed, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "He recognized the locket. He recognized me. Or at least he recognized her in me." Liam leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "This is just the start, Daphne. He's not going to just let this go. His entire empire is built on an image of untouchable power. You just proved he's touchable. He's going to come after you. Hard." "I know," she said quietly. "But he doesn't know what we have." Daphne's quest wasn't just for acknowledgement, it was for justice. And it was rooted in a memory, a fractured, terrifying memory, from when she was 4 years old. Flashback, 20 years ago. The memory was a collage of sensations. The smell of rain on hot asphalt, the taste of salt from her own tears, the flashing red and blue lights that painted strange dancing patterns on the ceiling of their small apartment. She remembered her mother Isla laughing earlier that day. Izzy was all vibrant colors and boundless energy, a painter who worked on huge canvases that took up half their living room, smelling of turpentine and passion. But then the man had come. The man Daphne was told to call Mark. He didn't visit often anymore. When he did, the laughter stopped. Their voices were sharp, angry whispers from the other room. Daphne hid behind the sofa, clutching a stuffed rabbit. She heard words she didn't understand. Sell out. Promise. Better life. Forgetting us. Then a slam, her mother crying. Later a sound from the rickety fire escape outside the window. A thud, a terrible guttural cry of pain. Daphne had run to the window. Her mother was lying on the wet pavement of the alley below, twisted at an unnatural angle. And Mark Everett Winslow was standing over her. He wasn't screaming for help. He was on his phone, his voice low and urgent. It happened. Yes, the fire escape. It's a mess. Handle it. He had looked up then, and his eyes met Daphne's through the window. A flicker of panic crossed his face. He didn't wave. He didn't come to get her. He finished his call, got into a sleek black car that had been waiting at the end of the alley, and drove away. He left her there. He left her mother to die alone on the pavement while he called his fixer to handle it. The official report would later call it a tragic accident. A faulty railing on an old fire escape. A woman possibly drinking who slipped and fell. Case closed. Present day. He didn't just leave her, Liam. Daphne said, her voice trembling with the weight of the 2-decade-old memory. He was there. He watched her die and called someone to clean it up, not to save her. He chose his ambition over her life. Liam listened, his pen still. And we're going to prove it, he said, his voice a low promise. The performance at Aurelia was Act 1. Now the real fight begins. Daphne nodded, staring into her coffee. The image of Everett Winslow's shattered face in the restaurant was satisfying, but it was fleeting. The real prize was the truth, and she knew he would use every bit of his billion-dollar fortune to keep it buried. The Blacktown car sped through the canyons of Manhattan, a silent projectile cutting through the city's late-night energy. Inside, the atmosphere was colder than the air outside. Everett Winslow stared out the window, but he wasn't seeing the familiar blur of neon and steel. He was seeing a ghost. Isla's face, 20 years younger, superimposed over the streetlights, her laughter echoing in the hum of the tires. "Father," Wyatt said, breaking the suffocating silence. "Father, you have to say something. Who was that woman? What did she mean about her mother?" Everett turned his head slowly, his eyes looking old and hollowed out. "She's a liar," he rasped, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "A grifter. She sees a rich man and invents a story to get a payday. It's the oldest trick in the book. She knew your name." Wyatt pressed his voice, shaking slightly. "She said you were called Mark. She knew about a locket. He trailed off, unable to voice the most damning part. "She has your jawline. She has eyes I've only ever seen in your old photos. Details can be bought or dug up by some bottom-feeding journalist." Everett slammed his fist on the leather seat. "This is a coordinated attack, Wyatt. A threat to this family, to everything I've built." "Is it?" Wyatt asked, a note of defiance creeping into his voice. Or is it the truth? Everett stared at his son, a fresh wave of fury rising in him. You will not question me. Not now. You will stand by me, and we will crush this. Is that understood? Wyatt shrank back under his father's glare, giving a clipped, resentful nod. The car pulled up to the imposing entrance of the Winslow Tower on Park Avenue, a monument of glass and black marble that served as both his corporate headquarters and his palatial residence in the penthouse. As he swept through the lobby, his mind was already working, the shock giving way to cold, ruthless strategy. The girl Daphne was a problem. Problems were to be dismantled, neutralized, and erased. The moment he entered his penthouse, his second wife, Catherine, was there to greet him. She was a woman who seemed carved from ice, elegant and impeccably preserved, her life a testament to charity galas and art auctions. "Everett, darling, you're home early," she said, gliding towards him. "My phone has been buzzing," a text from Sarah Lexington. She was at Aurelia. She said there was a scene. "It was nothing," Everett said, pulling off his tie. "A deranged employee. It's been handled. She said the woman claimed to be your daughter." Catherine said, her voice perfectly even, but her eyes were sharp, analytical. Everett finally stopped and looked at her. "And you believe the ravings of a waitress over your husband of 25 years. I believe that something happened to make you leave a restaurant without paying the bill," she replied coolly. "That is not in your character." Before he could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID read Ellison. He walked into his study, a cavernous room of dark wood and leather, and shut the door. "What?" he answered. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. It belonged to Arthur Ellison, a man who existed in the shadows of Everett's life. He was officially the head of corporate security, but his real title was Fixer. He was the man Everett had called on that rainy night 2 decades ago. "Sir, my monitoring services have lit up. A major spike in social media chatter originating from Aurelia, all tied to your name," Ellison said. "I'm already working to contain it, but it's spreading fast." "I need more than containment, Arthur," Everett said, his voice low and dangerous. "I need you to find out everything there is to know about a waitress named Daphne Miller. Where she lives, who her friends are, where she buys her coffee. I want to know what she ate for breakfast. I want leverage, something to make her disappear." "I'm already on it, sir," Ellison replied. "Initial search connects her to a freelance journalist, a Liam O'Connell. He has a reputation for being a troublemaker." "Then make trouble for him," Everett ordered. "I want this snuffed out by morning, whatever it takes." "Understood, sir," Ellison said. "There is one other thing. The name she used. Isla Penrose." Everett's hand tightened on his phone. "What about it?" "The records from 20 years ago. The ones we sealed, I've double-checked. They're secure. The police report the coroner's findings. The official narrative is rock solid." "Make sure it stays that way," Everett commanded, and hung up. He sank into his leather chair, the adrenaline of the confrontation ebbing away, leaving behind a cold dread. He opened a locked drawer in his desk and pulled out a small old photograph, hidden beneath a stack of newer, glossier family pictures. It was of him and Izzy, taken in a photo booth. He was a young man, with more hair and a hungry look in his eyes, his arm slung around a beautiful dark-haired girl, who was laughing, her head thrown back in pure joy. They were poor, ridiculously in love, and believed they could conquer the world. He had conquered the world, but he had done it by sacrificing her. Flashback 21 years ago. A partnership, Izzy. With a major developer. Mark not yet. Everett burst into their tiny apartment, waving a sheaf of papers. "This is it. This is our ticket out of this dump." Isla, her hands smudged with paint, looked up from her canvas. "That's wonderful, Mark. But what does it mean?" "It means I need to look the part. Act the part." he said, pacing excitedly. We need to go to dinners, to parties. We need to network to impress people. He looked around their apartment at the paint-splattered floor and the mismatched furniture. His gaze fell on her. You'll have to, tone down the art stuff. Wear something more classic. Isla's smile faltered. Tone it down. My art is who I am, Mark. It's a hobby, baby, he said, trying to be gentle. But the condescension was there. My work is a career. It's our future. Don't you want a better life for us? For little Daphne? Their 1-year-old daughter was asleep in her crib in the corner. The argument that followed was the first of many. He wanted to change his name to Everett Winslow, sounding more powerful than Mark. He wanted to move to a sterile high-rise. He wanted her to be a corporate wife, not a bohemian artist. Every step he took towards his new life was a step away from the world they had built together. He saw her as an anchor. She saw him as a man losing his soul. The final break came a year later. He had secured his fortune. He offered her a settlement, a nice apartment, child support. It's for the best, Izzy, he'd said, unable to meet her eyes. We're just from different worlds now. You built your new world on the promises you made in this one. She had whispered, tears streaming down her face, clutching their daughter. And you're a coward for abandoning it. Present day, the memory was a sharp pain in his chest. He had told himself it was necessary. A clean break. He had provided for them from a distance, through a blind trust. But then came the accident. Ellison had called him. There's been an incident. She fell. Everett had rushed to the scene. Seeing her lying there broken had shattered him. The old love, the guilt, it all came rushing back. But so did the terror. What would the press say? A billionaire's secret, destitute former lover, dead in an alley. It would ruin him. His career, his new marriage to Catherine, everything was on the line. So he made the call. Handle it. Ellison had handled it. The right palms were greased. The right reports were filed. Isla Penrose became a tragic footnote, and Mark became Everett Winslow forever. He put the photograph back in the drawer and locked it. The ghost had been buried once. He would bury her again, even if it meant burying her daughter too. Meanwhile, Daphne and Liam were poring over a laptop in the diner. The first blog posts were already appearing. Sensational headlines, blurry cell phone pictures. They're painting you as a crazy stalker, an extortionist, Liam noted, scrolling through the comments. The Winslow PR machine is already at work. Let them, Daphne said, her eyes fixed on the screen. They're confirming I exist. They're putting my name out there. That's a mistake. Because now people will start digging. Liam pointed to a file on the screen. Speaking of digging, I found something. Your mother's original autopsy report. I had to pull a lot of favors to get a non-redacted copy from a source at the city archives. He opened the file. Official cause of death, blunt force trauma consistent with a fall from height. Bar key was 0.09, just over the legal limit. Case closed. My mother barely drank, Daphne said flatly, especially not when I was home. I know, Liam said, but that's not the interesting part. Look at this. He zoomed in on a section of the report. Initial paramedic on scene. Name's George Bellwether. He filed a preliminary assessment. Notes here say, victim was responsive upon arrival. Possible spinal injury requested immediate transport to trauma center. Daphne stared at the screen. Responsive. She was alive when they got there. According to this, yes. Liam said, his voice grim. But look at the official timeline. The ambulance didn't transport her for another 45 minutes. By the time she got to the hospital, she was pronounced dead on arrival. 45 minutes. A lifetime. Why the delay? Daphne whispered, a cold sickness spreading through her. That's the million-dollar question, Liam said, closing the laptop. Or, in your father's case, the billion-dollar question. Paramedic George Bellwether retired 5 years ago. Lives in Staten Island. I think it's time we paid him a visit. The battle lines were drawn. On one side, a billionaire with unlimited resources and a dark secret to protect. On the other, a determined daughter armed with the truth and a journalist who wouldn't back down. The siege of Everett Winslow's fortress had begun. The morning sun did little to warm the cold, sterile atmosphere of the Winslow Industries boardroom. Everett stood before his board of directors, a collection of stony-faced men and women who valued stock prices above all else. The story had exploded overnight. It was no longer a gossip blog tidbit. It was a headline on the Wall Street Journal's website, a trending topic on Twitter. Winslow's turmoil billionaire accused by alleged daughter in public spectacle. It's a baseless extortion plot. Everett stated his voice, a hammer of authority, trying to beat the situation back into shape. A disgruntled former employee, coached by a parasitic journalist. Our legal team is filing a defamation suit as we speak, and Mr. Ellison's department is handling the security aspects. This is a nuisance, nothing more. Now regarding the quarterly projections. He tried to pivot to steer the conversation back to the familiar, comfortable language of money. But the room remained tense. A veteran board member, a shrewd woman named Evelyn Reed, cleared her throat. Everett, she said, her tone polite but laced with steel. Your personal life is your own, until it affects the share price. Our stock is down 4% in pre-market trading. A nuisance is not what the shareholders are calling this. They are calling it a liability. We need a more robust strategy than simply handling it. The unspoken question hung in the air. Is it true? Everett felt the walls of his control closing in. For the first time, the board was looking at him not as a leader, but as a problem. The strategy is to starve it of oxygen, he snapped. We release a firm denial, we refuse all comment, and we let the lawsuit do the talking. It will be old news in 48 hours. But it wouldn't. He knew it. This fire felt different. The pressure wasn't just in the boardroom. At the family breakfast table, an unnerving silence prevailed. Catherine picked at a grapefruit with surgical precision, her face an unreadable mask. Wyatt stared into his coffee cup, as if it held the answers to the universe. The University Endowment Board has called an emergency meeting, Catherine said without looking up, about my chairmanship. They're concerned about the optics. They're vultures, Everett muttered. They're protecting their brand, Catherine corrected him. Just as you are trying to protect yours. The question they are asking, and the one I am asking Everett, is, what exactly are you protecting? Before he could formulate a response, Wyatt finally spoke. I looked her up, he said quietly. Daphne Miller. She has a degree in social work from Hunter College. Graduated with honors. No criminal record. She's been working 2 jobs to pay off her student loans. This isn't the profile of a high-end grifter. So she's smart. It makes her more dangerous. Everett shot back, his temper fraying. Stay out of this, Wyatt. You don't understand the forces at play. I want to understand, Wyatt said, standing up his chair, scraping against the marble floor. I want to understand how a man who preaches about legacy and family could have a secret daughter who has to work as a waitress. Is that the legacy you want, Father? A legacy of secrets and cruelty. I am this family, Everett roared, rising to his full height. Everything you have is because of me. You will show me respect. The standoff was broken by Catherine's phone chiming. She glanced at it, and a flicker of something surprise alarm crossed her face. She quickly pocketed the device. The tension was unbearable. Wyatt, seeing he would get no answers, turned and left the room, leaving Everett alone with his wife's silent judgment and the ruins of his morning. Meanwhile, Daphne and Liam were navigating the quiet, tree-lined streets of Staten Island. They found the address for George Bellwether, a modest, well-kept house with a garden gnome on the lawn. An older man with a kind, tired face and a noticeable limp answered the door. "Mr. Bellwether," Liam started. "My name is Liam O'Connell. I'm a journalist. This is Daphne Miller. We'd like to ask you about a call you responded to 20 years ago." George Bellwether's friendly demeanor vanished. A shuttered, guarded look came over his face. 20 years ago, son, I was a paramedic for 30 years. That's thousands of calls. I don't remember." "We think you might remember this one," Daphne said gently. An alleyway in Hell's Kitchen. A woman named Isla Penrose fell from a fire escape. The color drained from George's face. He gripped the doorframe. I have nothing to say about that." He started to close the door. "She was alive when you got there," Daphne blurted out, her voice desperate. "Your report said she was responsive. But she died. They said she died on the way to the hospital. Please, she was my mother." The words "my mother" stopped him. He looked at Daphne's face, at her pleading, familiar eyes. The guilt he had carried for 2 decades churned in his gut. "You should go," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're stirring up things that are better left buried." He shut the door, leaving them standing on his porch. "He knows," Liam said, turning to Daphne. "He's terrified, but he knows something." As they walked back to the car, Daphne's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "They're watching you." The man in the black SUV at the end of the street. "Be careful. This is bigger than you think." Daphne's blood ran cold. She looked down the street. A black SUV with tinted windows was parked half a block away. It started its engine and slowly pulled away. Ellison's men. "Liam, we have to go, now," she said, her heart pounding. The threats were no longer abstract. They were real, and they were close. That evening, the intimidation escalated. While Daphne was out meeting Liam to discuss their next move, her small apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but everything was disturbed. Her books were thrown from their shelves, her clothes pulled from her closet, a single photograph of her and her mother. The only one she kept on display was turned to face the wall. It was a violation, a message. "We can get it to you any time we want." Daphne stood in the middle of the mess, feeling a profound sense of despair. Was this worth it? The fear, the invasion, the constant looking over her shoulder. She sank onto her disheveled bed, the weight of the fight pressing down on her. Her phone rang. It was Liam. "Don't panic," he said. "But my laptop's been wiped. Remotely. Everything. My source files, my contacts. They're trying to cut us off at the knees. How are you?" "They tossed my apartment," she said, her voice hollow. "Liam. Maybe he's won. Maybe he's too powerful." "No," Liam said, his voice fierce. "This is what they do, Daphne. They intimidate, they bully, they try to make you feel small and alone. It means they're scared. It means we're getting close. We just need to find a different way in." Just as Daphne was about to lose hope, her phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number. "He's not the only one with secrets. Check the Catherine Winslow Arts Foundation annual reports, specifically the anonymous donations from 25 years ago. Follow the money." Daphne stared at the message, her mind racing. Catherine Winslow. Why would his wife be helping her? Unless... Catherine didn't know she was helping her. Across town, in the Winslow penthouse, Catherine was in her private study. After her husband had stormed off to the office, she had acted on a suspicion that had been growing since the scene at the restaurant. Everett was a man of meticulous records, but he was also a man of deep secrets. She knew there were parts of his life before her that were strictly off-limits. She went to an old, locked filing cabinet in the back of his study, one he hadn't opened in years. She remembered the combination from a long-forgotten conversation. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside were dusty files from his early business days, and tucked away in the back, a thin folder labeled IR, Trust. She opened it. It contained legal documents establishing a blind trust for one, Isla Penrose, and her infant daughter Daphne Penrose. And beneath that, a single folded letter, the paper yellowed with age. It was in a woman's elegant script. "Mark," it began. "I can't accept this money. It feels like blood money, a payment to make you forget. I don't want your money. I want the man I fell in love with, the man who gave me a silver locket and promised me a lifetime, not a settlement. Please, Mark, don't do this. Don't throw us away." Catherine sank into a chair, the letter shaking in her hand. So it was true. All of it. Her husband of 25 years, the father of her son, had another family. A family he had discarded like a failed business venture. The cold, calculated cruelty of it struck her to the core. Her marriage, her life, it was all built on a foundation of lies and a woman's broken heart. The cracks in Everett Winslow's fortress were no longer just on the outside. They were spiderwebbing through the very heart of his home. And Catherine, the woman who had been his greatest asset, was about to become his most dangerous liability. The anonymous tip led Daphne and Liam to a digital labyrinth of financial reports. In a secure co-working space, Liam's fingers flew across the keyboard of a new encrypted laptop. "I've got it," he said, his voice tense with discovery. "The Catherine Winslow Arts Foundation. 20 years ago, right after your mother's death, a series of large, anonymous cash donations were made to a small community clinic. The same clinic where paramedic George Bellwether's wife was receiving expensive experimental cancer treatment." Daphne stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. So he paid him off. "It's more insidious than that," Liam said, shaking his head in disbelief. "He funneled the money through his wife's foundation. It was the perfect laundry, washing his guilt with her philanthropy. The sheer audacity of it." They now had leverage, a clear motive for Bellwether's silence. But they didn't have to use it. That evening, Daphne's phone rang with an unlisted number. It was George Bellwether, his voice frail and racked with a guilt that 2 decades couldn't erase. "I can't sleep," the old man stammered. "Seeing your face, it brought it all back. What he did. What I let him do." "What happened that night, George?" Daphne asked gently, putting the call on speaker for Liam to record. The story tumbled out, a confession held back for a lifetime. "We got the call a fall in an alley." George began, his voice shaky. "When we arrived, your mother, Isla, she was alive, conscious. She kept saying, 'My baby girl is upstairs.' And he was there. Everett Winslow. He looked like a cornered wolf." George's breath hitched. He pulled me aside. He showed me a picture of my wife Helen in her hospital bed. He knew about her leukemia, the cost of the treatment. He said, "I can make sure she gets the best care in the world. Or I can make sure she's sent home with aspirin." It wasn't a bribe. It was a threat to my wife's life. Tears streamed down Daphne's face. "He told me to delay." George continued, his voice breaking. "To stabilize her on site, to wait for a specialist transport that was never coming. He needed time for his fixer to manage the scene to plant a whiskey bottle. Every minute we waited, she was dying. I knew it. She whispered, "Tell my Daphne I love her." And then she was gone. I let her die to save my wife. My Helen. She died 2 years later anyway. I've been living in a house bought with blood money. The confession ended with a sob. Daphne felt a wave of vindication and profound sorrow. "George," she said, her voice filled with a strange compassion, "will you testify to this?" A long silence. "Yes," he finally whispered. "God help me. Yes." While Daphne secured her smoking gun, Everett Winslow's world was imploding. His wife Catherine had followed her own thread of suspicion, leading her to a locked filing cabinet in his study. Inside, she found a thin folder labeled IR Trust, containing legal documents for Isla Penrose and her daughter, and beneath them, a yellowed letter in a woman's elegant script. "I don't want your money," it read. "I want the man I fell in love with. Don't throw us away." That evening, she confronted Everett in his study. Her rage was not hot, but a glacial force. She placed Isla's letter on his desk. "I found this," she said, her voice devoid of warmth, "along with the trust documents for your secret family." Everett paled. "Catherine, I can explain." "Can you—" She interrupted, her eyes blazing. "Can you explain abandoning a woman who loved you and hiding your own child from me for our entire marriage? Or was her convenient accident also part of the plan?" "That's a monstrous thing to say," he stammered. "I'm married to a monstrous man," she retorted, sliding another set of papers across the desk. "These are from my foundation. Anonymous donations used to pay a paramedic to cover up the death of your former lover. You used my legacy, the one good thing I thought I was building, to hide your filth. You laundered your guilt through my life's work." He was speechless, exposed, and stripped bare by the one person he thought was his impenetrable ally. "I am leaving you, Everett," she stated. "My lawyers will be very interested in these documents." As she turned to go, Wyatt appeared in the doorway, drawn by the confrontation. He saw the letter, his mother's resolute face, and his father's utter defeat. "It's all true, isn't it?" he asked, his voice quiet with disgust. "I did it for us," Everett pleaded, a last desperate grasp at justification. "For this family. You did it for you." Wyatt shot back, his voice shaking with anger. "You talk about strength and power, but you're a coward. You ran away from a woman who loved you and a child who needed you, and you let her die. That waitress, Daphne, she has more integrity than you have in your entire body." Wyatt walked to his mother's side, a protective arm around her. "I'm with you, Mom." They left the study together, leaving Everett Winslow utterly alone in the heart of his empire, a king in a castle whose walls had just come crashing down. The ghosts of the past were no longer whispering. They were screaming, and the entire world was about to hear. The law firm's conference room was a theater of reckoning. On one side of the vast mahogany table sat Daphne with Liam and their lawyer Hannah Singh. A quiet but resolute Wyatt had taken a seat beside her, a clear statement of his allegiance. Across from them, Everett Winslow was a hollowed-out version of his former self, flanked by a grim-faced legal team. Without preamble, Hannah Singh systematically dismantled Everett's defenses. She presented financial records, linking the Winslow Foundation to George Bellwether, and then with devastating finality, she played the audio recording of the old paramedic's confession. George's trembling voice filled the room, recounting the threat, the order to delay treatment, and the final words of a dying woman. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. Everett sat with his eyes closed, his face a mask of stone. Daphne then spoke, her voice clear and steady, as she addressed him directly. This was never about your money. I don't want your inheritance or your blood-soaked legacy. This was for my mother, Isla, the woman you erased." She slid a photograph across the table. It was not of her with him, but of Isla alone, laughing, her face splattered with paint as she stood proudly before a vibrant canvas. "This is who she was," Daphne said, "before you tried to make her small, before you left her to die in an alley." Everett opened his eyes. He looked at the photograph of the woman he'd lost, at the daughter who had her defiant eyes, and at the son whose respect he had squandered. The Titan broke. A deep, ragged sigh escaped him. "It's true." He whispered the words, resonating like a thunderclap. His lawyers flinched, but he silenced them with a wave. "All of it." He stared at the picture, the facade of the ruthless billionaire crumbling to dust. "I panicked. All I could think about was my career. I made the call. I told them to wait." He finally met Daphne's gaze, his own eyes swimming with tears. "I let her die." The confession was raw and total. The resolution that followed was swift. To avoid a public trial, Everett Winslow agreed to everything. He would step down as CEO of Winslow Industries, issue a full public confession, admitting his paternity and gross negligence, and fund the Isla Penrose Foundation with a $500 million endowment. The charity dedicated to supporting struggling female artists would be run by Daphne. As they left, Everett stopped Daphne in the hallway. "I know sorry is a meaningless word," he said, his voice hoarse. "But I am. For everything." Daphne looked at the broken man and felt only a profound, aching sadness. "I accept your apology," she said quietly. "Not for you, but for me." She turned and walked away, not looking back. Weeks later, Daphne stood before a new headstone in a quiet cemetery. It read, "Isla Penrose, beloved mother, a brilliant light." The fight was over. She had not gained a father, but she had reclaimed her mother's name and her own future. Wyatt, now leading Winslow Industries with a vow of ethical leadership, was slowly building a tentative, supportive relationship with her. They were bound by a shared history, determined to create good from its wreckage. Daphne placed a single sunflower on the grave. The yelling had stopped. In the silence that followed, there was peace. And so Everett Winslow's empire, built on secrets and steel, was ultimately brought down, not by a market crash, but by a ghost from the past and the unwavering courage of the daughter he abandoned. Daphne's story is a powerful reminder that truth, no matter how long it's been buried, will always fight its way to the surface. It shows us that integrity isn't about how much you have, but about who you are when no one is watching. She didn't seek revenge. She sought justice. And in doing so, she not only honored her mother's memory, but also built a new legacy of hope and creativity from the ashes of a broken one. What did you think of Daphne's incredible journey? Do you believe Everett Winslow truly felt remorse in the end? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. These stories are important to share as they remind us of the power of a single voice. If this story moved you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more true-life dramatic stories that you won't forget. Thank you for watching.